So we're going to do some literary criticism here using Sunset Boulevard as our text. Now, literary criticism, you can actually use it to analyze anything. Literature, film, visual art, architecture, music. Again, they're called literary theories, but you can really apply them very broadly. So, we're going to be looking at two types of criticism with regard to Sunset Boulevard. The first is formalism, and the other one is feminism. You were asked to take notes during the film, and on one sort of half of your note taking sheet was a place for you to put formalist observations, things you noticed about how the film was composed. Meaning shots, lighting, costumes, gestures, all that kind of thing. The formal elements of film. On the other side, you were asked to think about feminism. So, how would a feminist critic view Sunset Boulevard through issues of gender and status and power and that sort of thing? So, as you're getting ready to write your film review, we're going to do some sort of together. We're going to think about some of the issues that come up and sort of do a sort of mock critique, as it were, of Sunset Boulevard. So we're going to start with sort of a funny quirk of the casting of this film, and I kind of embodied this in the very famous line that Norma Desmond bellows early in the film when she says, "I am big, it's the pictures that got small." We're going to be thinking about height and size in this film as a theme. So, one of the funny quirks of the casting of this film is that when Billy Wilder asked Gloria Swanson and William Holden to play the leads, he cast two people who have very different heights. Gloria Swanson is significantly shorter than William Holden. But it's funny, in a number of the scenes in the film, they actually appear to be the same height, or at least of very similar heights. Here's an example, here's a still from the film, in which they both seem to be the same size. How this is achieved in this particular case is that they're both lying down. And the way they're lying, Gloria Swanson is shown as being only a mere inch or two shorter than Joe Gillis. And one clever thing that Billy Wilder does is that it's very difficult to tell here where Gloria Swanson's legs end and the shadows of the film begin. And actually, Billy Wilder actually makes Gloria Swanson often in the film seem to be the same height or even taller than William Holden, often by light and by how he positions her in the film. So here's another example of this. Here's a shot from the film in which she's lying on a deck chair by her pool, and there's Max in the background. And again, through a very clever use of perspective, Gloria Swanson seems much bigger than Max, both height-wise, she seems much longer, and also just in sheer heft. And Max seems very small. This is similar to the shot early in the film when Norma Desmond first meets Joe when she thinks he's coming to take the monkey away. And if you remember, she approaches Joe from way in the background and walks to him in the foreground. And she seems to be getting much, much taller. It's an age-old optical illusion. And so Joe, William Holden, is actually standing on a lower step. And as Gloria Swanson approaches him, she seems to be getting taller. Billy Wilder consistently in this film makes Joe and Norma seem to be the same height, or actually even puts Norma Desmond higher or taller, as it were, than Joe. Now, a formalist would find this very interesting. Now, a formalist looks at the line, "I am big, it's the pictures that got small," and thinks to themselves, well, this is obviously an obsession in this film with size. Right? Whether it's height or think of the size of egos, the size of one's fame, the size of one's notoriety. Issues of size in this film become very important. Think of the massive house in which Norma Desmond lives, in which there are only two people who live in it. By contrast, think of the cramped spaces in which Joe lives, both his apartment and the office in which he works with Betty Schaefer. So again, size is very important here. Now, a feminist would be interested because they would say, well, Billy Wilder actually seems to imply that a woman can't be taken seriously if she's not the same size as a man. But also a feminist might say, well, that's interesting that Billy Wilder is actually mirroring Norma's status as a star, as a wealthy woman, by also giving her height. So she's completely dominant over Joe. So you can take kind of either side here of this sort of feminist argument. Now, Billy Wilder, being a very clever man, and actually also noted for directing comedies, makes a very subtle wordplay with regard to that famous line. Here is a picture, a still from the film, in which Norma Desmond is signing headshots. And it's funny, she says, of course, "I am big, it's the pictures that got small," and here she is signing small pictures, right? So Billy Wilder's almost poking fun at Norma Desmond's obsession with size, right? By having her sign small pictures of herself. So a formalist would, and a feminist again would have an interesting time here, sort of thinking about Billy Wilder's almost in joke about this and this obsession with size in the film. Another issue we can think about with regard to both formalism and feminism is this project that Norma Desmond's trying to get started, and that is that she wants to play Salome, the character from the New Testament. Now, of course, she pronounces it Salome, which is funny because most learned individuals do not say Salome. That's a bit of a not almost a bumpkin perhaps way of saying Salome. So Billy Wilder kind of pokes fun at Norma Desmond here. By having her pronounce it almost wrong. But we're going to look at sort of female sexuality and why Salome was the story, the script that that Norma Desmond chose, and why Billy Wilder had her embody Salome, especially at the end of the film when she thinks she's on camera. So, just a quick lesson here. Salome is a figure from the New Testament. Now, a little bit of backstory. Salome's stepfather was Herod, and Herod was the ruler of Judea. He was put in place by Rome to rule this province, and that is in what is modern day Israel and what encompasses modern day Jerusalem. Herod was hearing stories about this new sort of Messiah figure named Jesus, and John the Baptist was the man who was responsible for proclaiming Jesus' coming and also baptizing Jesus. So Herod's hearing about this kind of weird, sort of radical Jewish sect that was making trouble outside Jerusalem in sort of the Judean countryside. And he eventually has John the Baptist, who again was whose job was to proclaim the coming of Christ and of God, of a Judeo-Christian God. He has John the Baptist imprisoned for being a sort of a political rabble rouser, right? And so actually John the Baptist is one of the more famous political prisoners in history. Now, his stepdaughter here is Salome, and she's pictured in the center, and Herod's pictured on the right. Salome's mother, Herodias, actually married Herod after the death of her first husband. Now, the New Testament actually doesn't say a lot about this episode. It really focuses on John the Baptist. So here's what happened to John the Baptist. Salome decides that she's in love with John the Baptist, and so she makes advances toward him. John the Baptist says no. Salome becomes enraged and demands that he be killed. And Herod, she says to Herod, I want you to kill John the Baptist. Now, in the New Testament, all we really know is that John the Baptist is imprisoned, and Salome decides that he should be killed. And in order to convince her father to kill John the Baptist, Salome dances for Herod, right? Which is supposed to get him all excited. And he is, in fact, killed. He is, in fact, beheaded. The Salome sort of myth, legend, story grew and was added onto. Parts of it were added onto after the New Testament was created, and she becomes in these sort of subsequent versions a much more sexualized young woman, and sort of this sort of figure of demented desire, right? And this figure who could kill a man, right? Who could cut off his head. So here's, by the way, Caravaggio's famous canvas. He being, of course, the painter of David and Goliath, and the Calling of Saint Matthew, which we viewed earlier in the year. So here's right here is one of Herod's guards beheading John the Baptist, although the picture here is actually not complete. John the Baptist's head is down here. Here's Salome about to receive the head, although in most versions of the story, the head is presented to her. So Salome became a very popular subject in painting. Because here's this exotic, young, beautiful woman who is murderous, and we always have a fascination in our culture with women who kill, because it's not supposed to happen, right? Women are supposed to be nurturing and motherly and saintly, and so here is one who had this saint murdered. So now, going back to Sunset Boulevard here, Billy Wilder invokes the Salome story, again, because Norma Desmond wants to portray her on film, and the kind of nasty joke is that she's far too old to play Salome, but that doesn't seem to stop her. So we're going to go to the end of the film, in which Norma Desmond thinks she's on camera, right? She's having a demented sort of episode, although it's really a debate whether she's actually gone over the edge, or whether she just has decided that she's going to finally be the star she wanted to be. Now, besides having Gloria Swanson as Norma Desmond dress up like Salome, say Salome's lines, Billy Wilder makes a very subtle reference to the Salome story. Franz Waxman, who composed the score, quotes a piece of music when Norma Desmond is walking down the staircase as Salome. The piece of music that Franz Waxman quotes was by the German composer Richard Strauss. And Richard Strauss, in the first couple years of the 20th century, wrote an opera based on the Salome story that was incredibly scandalous. The music was very harsh and dissonant. It was not the sort of pretty, lush, uplifting music typical of the period. It was dark. It was thorny. It was really quite unsettling. And actually, if you hear Richard Strauss's Salome live, it is one of the more unsettling pieces of music you will hear. So I'm going to play for you a little bit of the final scene from Sunset Boulevard. I'm going to point out to you the piece of music that Franz Waxman quotes from Richard Strauss's opera. So as you watch this final scene, we've already seen the film, so you don't have to worry so much about getting the plot. Listen for the underscoring as Gloria Swanson comes down the stairs as Salome, and listen to the higher pitched woodwinds, the flutes. They're going to play this note as a trill, meaning two notes that are slightly separated by pitch that go back and forth, that alternate very quickly back and forth. Right, so two notes separated very closely in pitch that alternate really quickly, and it gives that kind of typical scary movie type of sound to it, this kind of fluttery sound. So listen to that as as Gloria Swanson, thinking she's Salome, descends the staircase.
What's happening up there? Why did you do it?
Your confession?
Everything set up, gentlemen? Lights ready?
All set.
So here's that sort of trill I was talking about.
Okay, fellas. Quiet, everybody. Lights. Are you ready, Norma?
What is the scene? Where am I?
This is the staircase of the palace.
Now, I'm going to let this play out because you're also going to hear how the music shifts as she comes down the staircase. So pay attention to how the music changes as she goes down the staircase. You'll hear a lot more brass, a lot more trumpets. So again, just listen for the underscoring here.
So they were turning after all. Those cameras. Life, which can be strangely merciful, had taken pity on Norma Desmond. The dream she had clung to so desperately had enfolded her.
I can't go on with the scene. I'm too happy. Mr. DeMille, do you mind if I say a few words? Thank you. I just want to tell you all how happy I am to be back in the...
And I'm going to skip ahead to the end here, where the music comes back.
All right, Mr. DeMille, I'm ready for my close-up.
Now let's go ahead and look, or listen, I suppose, to the opera that this was taken from. And we're going to talk about why Billy Wilder might have chosen this. You're going to see just the end of perhaps the most famous part of Richard Strauss's opera, and that is the Dance of the Seven Veils. This is the dance that Salome performs for her stepfather to convince him to have John the Baptist beheaded. So you're going to see, by the way, it's a very modern production. There's no sort of biblical Jerusalem look to it. So you won't see any palm fronds or sort of jewelry or silks and all that kind of thing. You're going to see the American soprano Catherine Amalfitano and the English tenor Kenneth Regal as Herod and Catherine Amalfitano as Salome, and she's going to do. You'll see the end of the Dance of the Seven Veils. This production, pardon me, is very modern, very stark, kind of postmodern, very eerie. In keeping with the sort of the mood of the music. Salome in most versions and in the New Testament is a teenager. The soprano here is not. By the time you're ready to sing Salome in most opera roles, you are not young enough to actually be convincing as the character would have been, sort of convincing that to convince someone you were 14, 15, 16, 17. But the opera voice is not mature into her 30s and 40s, so don't be surprised that you're going to see a woman in her 40s here playing Salome. So listen for the musical quotes that the film score composer Franz Waxman takes from Richard Strauss's opera here. So I'm going to start it near the end, and again, listen especially for that sort of the trill you heard from Sunset Boulevard and the sort of cataclysmic ending of this Dance of the Seven Veils. So I'm going to pick it up again, kind of in the middle, so it may be a bit jarring. And you'll see here that Salome will grab her last veil. So again, we're back to Gloria Swanson here as Norma playing Salome. So a formalist critic would note that very clear musical quotation, and again that particular piece of music, that sort of very eerie trill, and even sort of the brass trumpets at the end of it. Billy Wilder making a reference to that opera that many people would have known at the time. It was a very famous piece of music in the 1950s, so that reference would not have been lost on very many people. So a formalist would note that he chooses that very brutal opera version to quote as underscoring here. And a feminist, of course, would note any of the number of issues that come up when we talk about Salome. This sort of fear we have in Western cultures of being emasculated by a woman, of a woman having more power than a man. Women are supposed to be life-giving, and here they're taking lives. Just like Salome has John the Baptist beheaded, Norma Desmond's going to kill Joe Gillis, right? And so here again, formalism and feminism can mix. Again, the formalist would say that Billy Wilder really wants us to think about this Salome legend story, this murderous female who's preying on a man and using her sexuality or sort of invoking the sexuality or invoking sexuality generally to get what she wants, and quoting another piece of music, quoting an opera to sort of, again, make that link very clear, right? And also opera being very grandiose and larger than life, and kind of, if taken out of context, a bit ridiculous. Just like Norma Desmond herself is these things. And a feminist, of course, would notice again that Norma Desmond wants to be Salome. She wants to have power over people, over men, but she uses her sexuality to do it. So perhaps the implication here is that women can only achieve what they want through sexuality and murder. But at the same time, she is triumphant at the end. But then Billy Wilder gets that last possible dig in there, and he makes her kind of have a mental break, so she can't fully actually be empowered or sort of triumph in her action at the end. So again, here's an example again of how formalism and feminist criticism can come together. You may be asked to do one or the other or both, depending on how well you interacted with the film.